So, like, another way to look at this too is like when it comes to Mary, you could say that Mary interacted with God in a way that should be respected and should be looked up to,
Yeah.
and should be striven for, and also to realize that her interaction with God is something that participates in the saving of us all.
Right.
And like the same with all the rest of the saints. Like, their interaction with God is something that, like, we talk about the experience of the saints and learning from it and things like that. That's kind of what we're getting at here, is like, them in and of themselves is not going to save us, but their interaction with God and God's work through them, demonstrates something that is possible in all of us.
Yeah, and so what ends up happening, and you'll hear this from Catholic and Orthodox people all the time, and for a long time I didn't understand what point they were making, because it kind of doesn't make sense at first. But what really does start happening when you stop paying attention to Mary, especially with Mary, but this is also true of all the other saints and icons and everything, is when you discard those things entirely, eventually what that amounts to is you're denying God's actual work in the world. You're denying, in a way, like you're actually pushing back and denying the actual incarnation of God, because like that goes back to the question I asked at the beginning, somebody might pose, is why do I need these things? The answer to that is you need symbols that are teaching you. So if I'm looking constantly at these symbols, those symbols are teaching me something, and I'm participating in the thing, and like I need that. I'm trying to keep that thought together. What we're missing out on when we stop looking at Mary is what Mary represents, what the symbol is. Like, symbols are very, very important, and a Christianity without symbols just stops being something that's real. And I think, like, ultimately, if you're a Protestant and you're looking at this question and thinking, why do they say all these weird things about Mary? Why do they have these hymns and these prayers for Mary? Why do you go into an Orthodox church and at the front there's this huge icon of the Theotokos? Like, this seems weird. Why is this? It's like, well, this is why, because they put that right there, and they do all of these things so that they're constantly participating in the symbol. And by participating in it, by participating in symbols, the symbols shape you because they're real.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so this, specifically, you're mentioning symbols a lot, but in among that, you're referring to images of Mary.
Mm-hmm.
And when you see images of Mary, you see Mary with Christ.
Right.
And I'll come back around to this because of we'll get into Mary as a symbol of the church in the future, but later in the conversation, I mean. But when you see Mary pictured with Christ, then what you're seeing is receptivity toward God brings Christ into the world. And that's the symbol that you're beholding, and that's the symbol that you're adopting and making that a part of yourself. I too, like Mary, am going to be receptive toward God, and like Mary, I will bear Christ into the world.
Mm-hmm.
And
go ahead.
that symbolism is extraordinarily powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Because, and at the very least, if it violates someone's sensibilities to, like, say, the Marian type prayers and things like that, I don't think you should be offended by the depiction of Mary with Christ and what that represents.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's pretty obvious, and that's like something that we need. as Christians. And without
Yeah.
it, like David said earlier, we're missing a huge piece.
Well, I contrasted that receptivity toward the masculine stance toward the world of go out and make an impact, go out and do something, accomplish something, and build something, which I think is very important. And I'm definitely not I'm definitely not anti like positive constructive masculinity. But if you don't have that receptivity, then it's like you're just spinning wheels. Like you're not, you have no heart. Like you have no soul. Like you're just going out and doing a bunch of things.
Yeah, which like gets at what I was trying to get at with like denial of the incarnation, is because at the heart of the doctrine of the incarnation is this idea that, well, God gave us the law, and the law was perfect in its statutes. And if you could follow the law completely, you would be a perfect person. But the problem is you can't. You can't follow the law completely. And the Jews, no, like it wasn't ever intended for that. Like ultimately the purpose of the law was Mary. I think this is what the church comes to understand, and I think you see the prophets understand this. The actual function of the law was to prepare the faithful remnant of Israel through which God could then come into the world, and then God coming into the world fulfills the law. But that's the key there, is you have the law, you yourself cannot fulfill it. And people tried and tried to fulfill it, but they couldn't. But now that Christ has come into the world through faithfulness, now you are able to fulfill, or rather Christ is able to fulfill the law in you. And so like that's what happens, like Mary is the first. Mary is the first one in which the law is fulfilled. Like the law is fulfilled in her literally, in that Christ is in her. And so like Mary is like the most literal expression of Christian symbolism.